Durango, Mexico, June 1965. The desert sun was brutal, 110 degrees by noon. The kind of heat that made cameras malfunction and tempers flare. The kind of heat that could kill a healthy man. John Wayne was not a healthy man. 8 months earlier, Duke had walked into Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles for what he thought was a routine checkup. He walked out missing his left lung and half of 2 ribs. The diagnosis was lung cancer. The prognosis was uncertain. The doctors told him to rest, to take a year off, to let his body heal. Duke told them to go to hell. He was John Wayne. He didn't rest. He didn't take years off. He made movies. That's what he did. That's who he was. And if cancer thought it could change that, cancer didn't know John Wayne. So here he was, 8 months after surgery, on location in Mexico for the Sons of Katie Elder, playing one of 4 brothers seeking revenge for their mother's death, riding horses, doing stunts, pretending nothing had happened. The studio had insisted on a doctor being present at all times. They'd taken out extra insurance. They'd built rest areas near every shooting location. They'd done everything they could to prepare for the worst. But nobody had prepared Dean Martin. Dean arrived on set 3 days into production. He was playing Tom Elder, Duke's brother in the film. They'd worked together once before, on Rio Bravo in 1959, and they'd become friends, real friends, the kind who didn't need to talk to communicate. When Dean saw Duke for the first time in Durango, he didn't let his face change. But inside, his heart broke. Duke had lost 40 pounds since Rio Bravo. His famous broad shoulders looked thin inside his costume. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp, his eyes tired in a way Dean had never seen before. He looked like a man who was dying, because he was. The cancer might have been removed, but the surgery had taken something else, some vital force that had always made John Wayne seem invincible. The Duke that Dean remembered could ride all day, drink all night, and still be the first one on set the next morning. This Duke got winded walking to his mark. A wardrobe assistant who worked that production remembered Dean's arrival. He walked up to Duke, looked him right in the eye, and said, "Jesus, Duke, you look like hell. Mexico not agreeing with you?" And Duke laughed. Really laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh since we started shooting. That was Dean's gift. He knew that what Duke needed wasn't pity. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't people treating him like he was made of glass. What Duke needed was normal, and Dean was going to give it to him, even if he had to lie through his teeth to do it. The lies started small. Day 4 of production. They were shooting a scene where the 4 elder brothers ride into town. Simple stuff, just horses walking down a dusty street. But Duke was struggling. The heat was getting to him. His breathing was labored. Anyone watching closely could see his hands trembling on the reins. The director, Henry Hathaway, was a tough old bastard who had no patience for weakness. He was already frustrated with the production delays caused by Duke's condition. He was about to call for another take when Dean spoke up. "Henry, I need a break. This heat's killing me." Hathaway turned to him. "We just started, Dean. I know, but I'm not 20 anymore. Give me 10 minutes in the shade, I'll buy you a drink tonight." Hathaway looked annoyed, but Dean Martin was a star too. You didn't argue with stars. "Fine, 10 minutes. Everyone take 10. Dean walked off toward the shade tent. Duke followed, grateful for the break but not understanding why Dean needed it. Dean looked fine. Dean always looked fine. They sat in the tent together. A production assistant brought them water. "You okay?" Duke asked. Dean shrugged. "Just the heat. You know me. I'm a delicate flower." Duke laughed. "Delicate my ass." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Duke's breathing slowly returned to normal. The color came back to his face. Dean had bought him time, and Duke never knew. The lies continued throughout the production. When they were shooting a fight scene and Duke was clearly exhausted, Dean suddenly twisted his ankle and needed the scene postponed until the next day. When they were doing a long dialogue scene and Duke kept forgetting his lines, something that never happened to John Wayne, Dean started having trouble with his blocking and asked for multiple takes that gave Duke time to recover. When the afternoon heat became unbearable and Duke was visibly struggling, Dean would complain about the catering or start an argument with a crew member or find some other way to cause a delay that let Duke rest without having to ask for it. A script supervisor named Margaret Chen noticed what was happening after the first week. "Dean was covering for Duke," she said later. "Every time Duke needed a break, Dean would create a distraction. He'd suddenly need something from his trailer, or he'd have a question about a scene, or he'd start telling a long story that gave everyone an excuse to stop working. At first I thought he was just being difficult. Then I realized what he was doing. He was protecting Duke. She paused. The amazing thing was how he did it. He never made Duke look weak. He always made himself the problem. I need a break. I'm having trouble with this scene. Can we try that again? I think I can do it better. He took the blame so Duke didn't have to. Dean never talked about it. Not to Duke. Not to anyone. He just kept doing it. Day after day, week after week, for the entire 3-month production. One night, about halfway through filming, Duke showed up at Dean's trailer. It was late. Most of the crew had gone to bed. Duke had a bottle of bourbon in his hand. "You got a minute?" "For you. Always." They sat on the steps of Dean's trailer, passing the bottle back and forth, looking up at the Mexican stars. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Duke broke the silence. "I know what you're doing, Dean." Dean's heart stopped.
What do you mean?
"On set, the breaks, the delays, the problems you keep having." Dean didn't say anything. Duke took a long drink. "You're covering for me." "Duke, I don't know what you're—" "Don't." Duke's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't insult me by lying to my face. I've been in this business for 40 years. I know what a delay looks like. And I know the difference between a real problem and a manufactured one." Dean was silent. "Why?" Duke asked. "Why are you doing it?" Dean looked at his friend, at this giant of a man who had been reduced, who was fighting every day just to do the job he'd done effortlessly for decades. "Because you'd do the same for me." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." Duke stared at him. "I don't need charity, Dean. I don't need protection. I'm John goddamn Wayne. I can handle my own problems." "I know you can." "Then why?" Dean was quiet for a long moment. "You remember Rio Bravo, when that horse went down and I pulled you out?" "Of course I remember. You saved my life. And you said you owed me. You said that from then on we were family." Duke nodded. "Well, this is what family does, Duke. Family doesn't let you struggle alone. Family doesn't stand by and watch you suffer when they can do something about it." He looked at his friend. "You're not weak for needing help. You're human. And you've spent your whole life being John Wayne, strong, invincible, never showing weakness. But right now, you're fighting the hardest fight of your life, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let you fight it alone." Duke didn't say anything. His eyes were wet. "Besides," Dean added, his voice lighter now, "if you collapse on set, they'll shut down production and I won't get paid. So really, I'm just protecting my investment." Duke laughed, a real laugh, the first one Dean had heard in weeks. "You're a son of a bitch, Dean." "So I've been told." They sat there for another hour, passing the bourbon, not saying much. They didn't need to. They'd said everything that mattered. The next morning, filming continued, and Dean kept lying. But now Duke knew, and knowing made it different somehow. Not easier. Duke was still too proud to ask for help openly, but there was an understanding between them now. A silent agreement. Dean would create the excuses. Duke would take the breaks, and neither of them would ever speak of it again. The Sons of Katie Elder wrapped in late August 9. On the last day of shooting, after the final scene was in the can, the cast and crew gathered for a wrap party. There were toasts and speeches and all the usual Hollywood sentimentality. When it was Duke's turn to speak, he stood up slowly. He was still thin, still tired, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there at the start of production. Hope. "I want to thank everyone who worked on this picture," Duke said. "I know it wasn't easy. I know there were delays and problems and more than a few headaches." He looked at Dean. "But I also know that this crew, this family, carried me when I couldn't carry myself. And I'll never forget that." Dean raised his glass. Duke raised his back. No words were needed. The film was released in August 1965 to strong reviews and solid box office. Critics praised Wayne's performance, noting that he seemed vulnerable in a way he'd never been before. They didn't know how right they were. John Wayne lived for 14 more years. He made another 20 films. He won his only Academy Award for True Grit in 19. He became even more of an American icon than he'd already been. And through it all, he never forgot what Dean Martin had done for him in Durango. In 1976, during an interview for his final film, The Shootist, Duke was asked about his favorite co-stars. He mentioned many names: Maureen O'Hara, Jimmy Stewart, Katharine Hepburn. Then he paused. And Dean Martin, he said. Dean's special. How so? The interviewer asked. Duke thought for a long moment. Dean's the only man who ever lied to me for my own good. And he did it so well I almost believed him. He smiled. That's what a real friend does. They protect you even when you don't want to be protected. They carry your weight even when you're too proud to admit you can't carry it yourself. Dean did that for me once. I've never forgotten it. The interviewer pressed for details. Duke shook his head. Some stories aren't for telling. They're just for knowing. John Wayne died on June 11th, Cancer. Again. This time at 1. Dean was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. Years later, when Dean was asked about his friendship with Duke, he was typically evasive. Duke was a great man. The greatest I ever knew. We made a couple pictures together. Had some laughs. There are stories about you covering for him during Sons of Katie Elder. About you creating delays so he could rest. Dean smiled. That famous sleepy smile. I don't know anything about that. I just remember it being hot as hell in Mexico. Anybody would need a break in that heat. But Duke was a professional. He did his job. That's all anybody needs to know. The interviewer gave up. Dean never told the truth publicly. Not because he was modest, not because he didn't want credit, but because admitting what he'd done would have meant admitting that Duke had needed help, and Dean would never do that, even after Duke was gone. That's what it means to protect someone's honor. You keep their secrets even when there's no one left to hurt. You guard their pride even when they're not around to thank you. You tell the lies that need to be told, and you take them to your grave. Margaret Chen, the script supervisor, was interviewed in 2005 for a documentary about classic Hollywood. I've worked on hundreds of films, she said. I've seen every kind of behavior you can imagine. Ego, cruelty, kindness, selfishness. But what Dean Martin did on Sons of Katie Elder, that was different. That was love. Real love. The kind that doesn't need to be seen or acknowledged. The kind that just does what needs to be done and never asks for anything in return. She paused. Duke never had to ask for help, because Dean made sure he never had to. That's the greatest gift you can give someone. Not help itself, but help that preserves their dignity. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 16 years after Duke. At his funeral, among the hundreds of mourners, there was a woman in her 80s, Margaret Chen, the script supervisor from Sons of Katie Elder. She'd come to pay her respects to the man she'd watched lie for his friend, day after day, in the Mexican heat 30 years before. After the service, someone asked her why she'd come. Because I saw something once, she said. Something beautiful. A man who loved his friend so much that he pretended to be weak so his friend could stay strong. That's rare. That's so rare. She wiped her eyes. Dean Martin was a lot of things. A singer, an actor, a star. But to me, he'll always be the man who lied to protect John Wayne and never asked for a single thing in return. That's the Dean Martin story that should be told. Not the cool detachment. Not the easy charm. Not the man who made everything look effortless. The man who pretended to be weak so his friend could stay strong. The man who took the blame so someone else could keep their pride. The man who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness is a lie told well. Duke never had to ask for help, because Dean made sure he never had to. And that's what love looks like. Not grand gestures. Not public declarations. Just quiet lies, told in the Mexican heat to protect a friend who was too proud to protect himself. If this story about protecting the ones we love moved you, subscribe and hit that thumbs up. Share with someone who's ever carried a friend without being asked. Have you ever lied to protect someone you loved? Let us know in the comments. Ring that notification bell for more untold stories about Dean Martin's legacy. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.